I've created a Blender add-on for creating trees like this, or like this animated one. Keep watching to learn how to use it. Welcome to the instructional video for my first Blender add-on, the BC Tree add-on version 1.0. Download link in the description. To install the add-on, you need to go to the Edit menu and under Preferences, find Add-ons on the left, click the Install button, and then navigate to the location of the script, bc_tree_panel.py, and click Install Add-on. Then do a search for the add-on. Typing BC finds it for me. Enable it with the checkbox, and don't forget to either save preferences or auto-save preferences. Let's delete the default cube and the default light. And the way to bring up the panel for the add-on is just to use the sidebar. Press the letter N, and you'll see a tab over here called Create, and under here you can see the BC Tree panel, where all of the controls are for the add-on. So let's just jump in and create a tree using the default settings by clicking the Generate button. So here we have a tree. It doesn't look like a conventional tree, but we can modify its shape. You can see there are two empties here, which we will call the control empties. So if you grab those empties, they control a lot of the other joints in the tree. You can scale them, you can rotate them. So let's do that to create something that's a little more conventionally tree-like. Incidentally, these can be rotated in all axes, so I can rotate this around the Z-axis to get something that's a little more sort of organic tree looking. Let me play with this for a moment here, see what I can do. There we go. All right, so let's say that that's sort of an organic looking tree. Let's talk about the settings. So here is a depth, which controls how many levels deep the tree goes. The default is 5, but we can go lower, we can go higher. Something to be aware of is that every time you increase the depth, you double the complexity of the tree. So you can very quickly get to a situation where it's a bit too much for Blender to handle. So be careful with that, depending on the power of your computer. There are two more empties here that I should mention. So this one will allow you to control the height of the stem. So if you move it vertically, you can make the stem of the tree taller or shorter. Of course, you can move it in all directions, but I mainly use it to move it straight up and straight down. And the bottom empty here is to control the location of the entire tree. Let's talk about the other settings. This tree basically is a mesh underneath that is composed of just vertices and edges with a skin modifier creating the thickness. And what we can do is we can vary the thickness between the base of the tree and the tips of the individual branches with these two arguments here, max thickness and min thickness. So if I increase max thickness, you can see the base of the tree gets thicker. It's still tapering to the same minimum thickness at the tips, but it's getting thicker at the base. So let me bring that number down, bring this number down, like so, to have a thinner tree. Great. Let me show you what else you can do with this. If we click the Show All Empties checkbox, then you can see all of these hidden empties that are controlling the other joints in the tree. So they all have basically copy transform constraints pointing back to those two control empties, which is why they move when it does. And so if you wanted to, you can actually modify the shape of the tree by grabbing one of these empties and moving it. And that modification will remain even if you continue to modify the control empties. So for example, you can see I've stretched this one branch out. If I rotate the control empty, that stretched branch remains. However, it's worth keeping in mind that any kind of rotation that you do on this can be undone by the next setting that I'm going to show you. So let's set this up as a rotation so you can see what happens. So the next setting that I want to talk about is the random factor. So at the moment, aside from that deliberate modification that I've just made. Every part of this tree is basically an identical copy of the entire tree, with slightly different thickness and so on, but there's a kind of perfect symmetry here that you may not want for your tree. So you can either modify it directly, as I've just demonstrated with the one branch, but you can also modify the random factor. Incidentally, you'll notice that as soon as I touch that random factor, that branch that I had deliberately rotated snapped back into place. So keep in mind that when you tweak those empties, if you do any rotational tweaks, you don't want to touch the random factor after that. Just something to keep in mind. You can drag this up to full randomness or drag it back down to 0, which is perfect symmetry. Let me set it to, say, 0.5. If we don't like the particular way that the tree has been randomized, we can click New Random Seed, and it'll just randomize the tree in a different way. And then you can still drag that to full or 0 randomization. I'm going to take it back to 0 for now. Basically, what we have here is, as I said before, we have a mesh made of vertices and edges. We've got a skin modifier giving it thickness, and then we've got these two empties in particular, the control empties, that are controlling all of these hidden empties at every vertex in the mesh. They're all hooked to those empties, and they all have copy transform constraints, allowing them to be controlled by the control empties. What we can do is we can take our tree, let's say that we like it the way it is, and we can boil it all the way down to a single mesh without any of these helper objects and constraints and so on. And we can do that in a number of steps. We can do it all at once, or we can do it progressively. Let's do it progressively here. So the first button below Generate here is Remove Controls. So if you click that, now these two control empties, they're no longer the target of copy transform constraints that affect the rest of the tree. So if I move this empty, all I do is move the branch that it is the base of. And that's the same for all of the empties. So if we show them all, let's say that I grab this one here and move it, you'll see that it only controls that one branch for which it is the base. Great. So that's removing the controls. The next step is unparenting the empties. So the reason why the entire branch moves here is that all of the downstream empties are parented to this empty. So we can actually remove that parenting relationship with this next button, like so. And now any empty that you move will literally be the only thing that you move. So you can undo the parenting relationship. The next step in getting rid of all of this extra stuff is to remove the empties themselves, and that is the next button. So if I click on Remove Empties, the operation will take a little bit of time, and now they're gone. If you have a very deep tree, by the way, it'll take even more time, just be aware. Be patient with that. And so now there are no empties. All we have is our mesh with a skin modifier. Now that we don't have hook modifiers connecting all the vertices to these empties, we can actually go into edit mode for the tree, into wireframe, and we can see the individual vertices and edges that I was talking about before. But let's get back to the regular view, back in object mode, and let's do the final step. So there is still a skin modifier here. If we click Apply Skin Modifier, now we have the final mesh. And you can apply subsurface division modifiers or whatever else you might want to do to it. You can UV unwrap it. Anything that you would do with any ordinary mesh in Blender, you can now do with the tree. But suppose that you wanted to grow leaves from the tree. Likely you want them to grow sort of close to the tips of the branches rather than down on the base. So the add-on does help you here a little bit. For the mesh that's been generated here, there is a vertex group called tips. If we select it, you'll see the tips of all the branches are in that vertex group. So you can sprout leaves directly from the tips, or you can go to the Select menu and press M for more or less and M for more, so double M. And it'll select more vertices. We can do that repeatedly. Like this. And now we've selected a region of the tree where we might plausibly want leaves to sprout. So we can create a new vertex group. Let's just call it leaves. And we can assign all of these vertices to that vertex group. And now if you want to, you can use a particle system, a hair system, and have leaves spread from this part of the tree. All right, the last thing to show you is, let's delete this tree and generate a new one. Let's go back to our default depth of 5. But before I generate it, what I want to do is add 2 objects. They can be any objects. I'm going to add 2 cubes. So here's one, here's another. Now remember the 2 empties that I called control empties. They were generated by the add-on. But what we can do is we can tell the add-on that we don't want to use the generated empties as controls. We can use objects of our choice as controls for the tree. What I can do is click Custom Controls, and for Control A, choose one of the cubes. For Control B, choose the other cube, and then generate the tree. Now, those 2 cubes that I added are the control objects that dictate the shape and orientation and scale, etc. of the tree. And so what's kind of fun about that is I could create, say, a third object, for example, and maybe make it the parent of those 2. And now if I modify that third object, I'm modifying both controls of the tree at the same time. And of course, you can animate that with keyframes, etc., just as you would with any other kind of animation in Blender. Great, I think that I've covered everything. I hope you find it useful. If you have any suggestions of things that I should add for version 2, yeah, let me know. I'm really also very keen to see what you guys do with the add-on. If you make anything with it, please drop me a link, let me know. Thanks a lot, and have a good one.